Well, hello there. Fancy meeting you.
Hello, good morning, Mike. Thanks for agreeing to appear on Meet the Archaeologist. Could you possibly just introduce yourself and your role here at the Council of British Archaeology?
Of course, I'm Mike Heyworth. I'm the Director of the Council of British Archaeology. I've been doing that for nearly 10 years now. And obviously my role working right across the United Kingdom is to effectively oversee the work of the CBA, the Council of British Archaeology, and to act as our chief executive and lead advocate, if you like, which tends to be the key role that I particularly pursue, as well as trying to manage the organisation and keep everything on the road.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay. So in terms of being a lead advocate, what sort of things do you find yourself doing? What does that actually involve?
Well, a lot of my work is trying to influence people, policies, money to further archaeology, really, and to improve public understanding of archaeology and to get more people involved in archaeology. And obviously it's a more complicated world than it used to be if we're working across the UK, because we're trying to influence things in 4 different countries. And I work particularly in England and Wales. A lot of my work is in England and Wales. But for example, I'm the secretary to the All-Party Parliamentary Archaeology Group at Westminster, and that has about 150 MPs and peers that have a specific interest in archaeology. They meet every other month, and they have briefings provided for them between meetings on key issues, and I sort all that out, and I'm the liaison person. It's chaired by Lord Renfrew, who conveniently is an eminent archaeologist, and it gives us a fantastic entree to decision makers and to opportunities to change and influence legislation. And we're doing similar sorts of things in other parts now, obviously with the Senedd in Wales and the Scottish Parliament, etc. So a lot of it is liaising with people like that, and also obviously with people in the National Heritage Agencies and anybody else who has influence to bear, really.
I see. Okay. So have you always had this sort of role? What did you do before you were at the top of the CBA?
I started off as an archaeological scientist, and that was my sort of initial interest in things, and I did a doctorate at Bradford University on the application of a particular technique called inductively coupled plasma spectrometry on ancient glass, and my particular thesis was interested in early Saxon glass. From Southampton and Winchester and on 2 sites like that. And then I worked for English Heritage in their Ancient Monuments Laboratory in London, in Savile Row. Amazing setup they had there. And I was in the Ancient Technology section. And I got more and more interested in the application of IT. And the reason I moved to the CBA was they advertised a job in 1990 to set up a computerised bibliography for British and Irish archaeology. And that was a really particular interest of mine at the time, was trying to look at how we could computerise things and get databases set up. And I was fortunate enough to be appointed to that. And it was a role that was based within the CBA in their London office, as we had in those days. But then over that period, since 1990, I've actually done a number of roles within the CBA. Having done the bibliography for a few years, I was appointed to the information officer role, which was newly created in the York office of CBA. And then for a while I was a deputy director, and then I was very fortunate to be appointed director in 2004.
Right. Well, that's quite a comprehensive answer there. Thank you. Well, okay. Moving away from what you are and who you are and how you came to be here. The Council of British Archaeology, when we talk about it, archaeologists and also actually the general public, there's often a slight confusion as to what role it plays. Would you say that the CBA has undergone any sort of shift in its identity? And if so, what does the CBA stand for now?
The CBA was set up in 1944, 70 years ago, at a time of crisis essentially for archaeology, because we were starting to look at all the redevelopment programmes that were going to take place after the Second World War was finished. And it was created by all the county societies that came together and said, we need a national voice to speak to government. And of course in those days it was one government across the UK. And we need that national champion. And that's primarily been the CBA's role, and I don't think that's really fundamentally changed at all.
Okay.
Over that period, though, we've also accumulated various other roles, and we've taken on various tasks for ourselves. I think the fundamental issue for CBA has always been the same, in that we represent the public interest in archaeology. We're the voice of the public. We're not the voice of the profession. We have other bodies that deal with that. We're not a special interest group. We have numerous other bodies that deal with that. We're the body that brings everything together and acts as the national voice on behalf of the public. And our members are obviously some professionals, but predominantly they're members of the general public with an interest in archaeology. And that gives us a particularly important but particularly focused role. And that hasn't changed at all. But of course, inevitably over the years, we've done different things. We've taken on projects. Part of CBA's role, I think, is to be forward-looking. And we've always been very innovative. And if you look back now to a number of the organisations that exist in archaeology, they started off as CBA projects or CBA committees, and quite some areas of archaeology, industrial archaeology, that started off as a CBA committee, and it then spread out, and it's now become a discipline in its own right, effectively, with its own specialist organisation. So fundamentally, the CBA has that key role, which I think has been pretty much the same throughout.
Right. Okay. So, so in that sense, how is it that you engage with the public then? Are there forums around across the country where people can get involved? And also as well, do you do any work, for example, going into schools? Or I know about the Young Archaeologists Club. What sort of things are happening there?
Sure. Well, I could talk for about 3 hours on that subject, and I'll try and keep it relatively succinct. Well, to start with education, perhaps. We have the Young Archaeologists Club, which has branches across the UK, as well as having a national membership club. The branches are run by volunteers, but they provide a hands-on opportunity for young people, normally between the ages of about 8 and 16. And I think that's a really, really important thing, because archaeology is a hands-on discipline. And actually, for young people to be able to have that sustained engagement with archaeology over potentially 8 years of their very, very formative years of their life can be really life-changing for them. And the clubs often meet once a month. So each year, hundreds of meetings are being held for young people to develop an interest in archaeology. So that's a really key thing for CBA. We're really important part of our work. Because we tend to focus on that side, which is informal education, if you like. We don't do work with schools, and that's not been a part of our work, partly because other organisations have fulfilled that brief rather well. English Heritage in England particularly, and the other national agencies as well. But the other key area for CBA is more, if you like, adult education and lifelong learning. It's had a whole variety of names. Continuing education is the latest trendy name for it, I think. And that's an area that we have a real concern about, because the universities have tended to withdraw from that in the last few years. And one of the things that we're thinking hard about at the moment is whether there are ways we can work with local groups, local societies, to actually put a network of adult education back in place, not necessarily linked to formal qualifications, because I don't think that's necessarily what people are looking for. But something that gives people a way to learn more about archaeology, and then get a route way to get more actively involved. And I think that the way that we can do that is to work with our partners at local and regional level. And when the CBA was established, there was a whole series of regional and national groups established. And they broadly still exist today, with a little bit of tinkering with the boundaries. And they act as hubs, if you like. They don't duplicate what local societies do or county societies. The regional groups act as hubs which can bring together activity over a slightly broader geographical range. But the crucial thing is that they work with local societies and the members, and they provide a lot of day meetings, conferences, field trips. So we don't tend to do that ourselves. We deliver that service to our members through this joint arrangements that we have with our regional groups. So it's a very good partnership, and it means that from a relatively small staff team based here in York, we can have an influence and an impact right across the UK, reaching all the parts, as it were.
Okay. Well, and actually in that sense, for example, I notice publications such as What's On in Your Area with the Festival of Archaeology, this kind of thing. These are, of course, very useful and very good reference points, absolutely. Okay, well, in your opinion, in your considered opinion, what challenges are facing archaeology in the coming years? What do you think is on the horizon, and what could be something to have to grapple with?
I think we've got some real problems, and I think we really have to work very closely together and bring together all the public support that we know exists for archaeology to really make a strong case for why archaeology needs to continue to exist, why it needs to be delivered in the way it's delivered, why we need protection systems in place, and why we need opportunities for people to study and learn about archaeology. All of those things are under threat. To take some specific examples, there's a real issue about local authority funding at the moment with all the cutbacks due to the economic situation. If we lose local expert advisors and historic environment record staff that actively maintain those dynamic resources, the whole basis of archaeological protection in this country will go, because it's protected through the planning system. We've got some sites that are nationally important and therefore they're designated, but even we have sites that are of national importance but are not designated, and they rely on the planning process to have their protection and to enable then other archaeologists to have the opportunity to come and investigate them in advance of development. All of that system could go in the next few years, and we're having to work very hard to make the case for why actually those services are crucial and they should be sustained.
And actually on that front, I mean, obviously you're never going to see the Stonehenge high-rise car park, are you? But as you say, there's a very real problem, archaeologists would say, of course, with the government easing the planning process, making it much easier for developers to go ahead without necessarily having an archaeological investigation on site. What are you doing to campaign about that? I mean, you mentioned that you're linked with the cross-parliamentary committee. What is it that you can do and that you are doing?
Well, obviously, over the last few years, there have been quite a few changes to the planning system, and the fundamental documents have been very significantly altered. And we've been very influential at working with politicians and with some of our other partner organisations to make sure that the right policies are in place in those documents. So, in England, for example, and obviously you've got equivalent policies in other parts of the UK, and we're working across the board to make sure all these work. But if you take England, we started off with from 1990 with PPG 16 and to some extent PPG 15. Those then got transformed into PPS 5, but within 2 years that was replaced by the National Planning Policy Framework, which is only just over a year old. Well, CBA, and one of the things I did was to press the case to make sure that the right policies were in the National Planning Policy Framework. And actually, because of those opportunities and because of the connections we have, I was able to actually directly influence the wording of some of those documents. We were shown, it was one of those slightly surreal moments where we were taken into a room, shown a copy of the draft document, said, you can't take this out of the room, but read it through, and in 10-15 minutes time, and once you've had a chance to have a read of it, let us know any thoughts you've got, and we'll try and see if we can reflect those in the final document.
Right.
Now, those are the sorts of opportunities that you can't really be very open about sometimes, but that's how the connections that we build up work. It's about making those links with people who know they can trust you, know that you're a source of useful information to them, and therefore it then means that behind the scenes you can have that level of influence. And what we're now doing is we're doing similar things with the guidance that goes with the National Planning Policy Framework, and then underneath the guidance there'll be good practice, because this is always tiered, and only yesterday I was meeting in London to draft the good practice aspect of things, which tries to make sure that every opportunity is taken to articulate what local authorities have to do, which is the policy, and then how they should do it and the best practice ways of doing it, which is the document we're working on now.
I see.
So what we then have to try and ensure is that the government holds the local authorities to account if they don't follow those policies, and that's what we're doing at the moment. And we've managed to convince the Culture Minister, Ed Vaizey, to effectively hold an inquiry into local authority archaeology services and how they work. And he's commissioned Lord Redesdale and John Howell MP, who are two of the leading members of the All-Party Parliamentary Archaeology Group, to deliver that. And that's being facilitated and supported by the Archaeology Forum, which is the grouping of all the main national players, including CBA, IFA, etc. And that inquiry is going to be probably announced publicly next week, and there'll be an opportunity for everybody to input ideas and thoughts. And that then a report will be produced, which will go to the Minister. And again, those channels are very useful and very important in terms of then getting to the policy makers.
Okay. And again, and also, so I definitely understand the value of not shouting about everything that you do and everything that you say. Otherwise, people won't talk to you. So I can, yeah, absolutely, and it's reassuring to hear that you are doing all that work actually behind the scenes. Absolutely. Okay, well, on a slightly more light-hearted note, what for you is the most satisfying thing about being an archaeologist?
I got into archaeology when I was a teenager, and I went digging. I didn't really know what to expect. I just went out for a day's excavation, and I just took to it. For me, it was I found my forte, if you like. Not saying I was a brilliant field archaeologist, but it was where I wanted to be. I was in an extremely fortunate position. I was down in Hampshire, and the local organisation I worked for employed me during my school holidays. I was able to really engage and get a whole range of experience of field archaeology, and it was just very satisfying, I found, to be part of that pursuit of knowledge. And for me, that's a large part of what archaeology is. It's that jigsaw puzzle that we're trying to put together. We don't know what the picture is. We know a lot of the pieces are missing, but it's an investigation process to try and see if we can get some understanding of the past. And I really enjoy that aspect of things, but I equally enjoy the process. And I think for many people, the process of archaeology is as important as the ambitions and the underpinning sort of knowledge aspects of it. And I think it really connects with people. And I've always wanted to do something that I felt was sort of socially useful. And I think archaeology is. And I think you see that when you go around and talk to local groups, community groups, local archaeological societies. It's something that fires people up. And I think now in the world we live in at the moment, with a lot of depressing news around and some very difficult circumstances for many people, I think archaeology has a lot to offer. I think it can really reconnect communities and societies, and it can bring together people from different generations. It can offer something to people who are disadvantaged and don't have, not necessarily have all the opportunities that others have had. And for me, that's really, really satisfying to be able to be part of something like that. And I think that's why the CBA is a key organisation in that is our role, is the link from archaeology to people. And public participation, for which then all those benefits in terms of well-being can be derived.
Yeah, and I suppose in that sense, actually, also archaeology, I firmly believe, has a near unique application in being able to use the past to surprise and challenge assumptions about the present. For example, economic protectionism, all this kind of thing. And
absolutely. Immigration,
absolutely. And so archaeology, I think, is very potent. Can be a very potent force.
Yeah. I think we need to articulate its benefits and its what we can learn from it better. And I think one of the things that we need is one or two national champions who can speak up and get the media attention, perhaps, in the way that we see in other disciplines. We need the David Attenborough for archaeology to some extent, and that's one of the things that we're trying to work on at the moment, is to try and make sure that we get the messages from archaeology into some of these national debates.
So I thought you meant we're constructing a David Attenborough robot somewhere. Obviously not. Okay, well you touched on, or rather we touched on what excites you about archaeology, and also actually mentioned a little bit about your first experience. But obviously, being a professional archaeologist at the moment is difficult. Pay standards when you're in the job, the job security, and also actually the route into archaeology. I mean, one of the reasons why I do these interviews is because there is no one archaeological career. I kept being asked, what is it like being an archaeologist? And I said, well, everyone's different. Every single archaeological path is different. So I suppose the next question would be, what advice would you give to someone who wants to get into archaeology? And I suppose there are two elements to that. On the one hand, someone who actually potentially wants to be a professional archaeologist, young or old, and also people who are just interested in dipping their toe, as it were.
Okay. Well, I mean, the good thing is that there is something for everybody in archaeology. No matter what skills you have, no matter what abilities you have, no matter what interests you have, there's something in archaeology that should appeal to you. And that's one of the attractions of it, I think, as a subject. Unfortunately, I think we're still a very university-based profession, and that is not easy, therefore, for everybody to find a route way in. And one of the things the CBA is trying to do is to work with other organisations to see if we can find more diverse pathways to come into archaeology. That possibly the National Vocational Qualification offers an opportunity there. I think internships and apprenticeships are the way forward to some degree, but funding is an issue for that. I think we all recognise, So at the moment, if you want to become a professional archaeologist, you pretty much have to get a degree. And then, even more beyond that, most people will have a master's degree as well. And of course, that for many people, that's difficult in terms of the financial implications. And we don't want to be a subject that is exclusive. CBA's motto is archaeology for all. We're trying to find ways in which everybody can get into the profession. But at the moment, that is the main route way through. The key thing then, alongside that academic experience, is skills and professional experience. And it's really, really important, and the advice I would always give to anybody is to try and get as much work experience as you possibly can. And when you see people's CVs when they apply for jobs, and clearly whenever we have an advertiser job, we're inundated with CVs from recent graduates particularly. The thing that makes people stand out is if they've got work experience and if they've got publications. And anybody that's done any original research, and they will have done for their undergraduate dissertation or their master's dissertation, they should look to get those published. Doesn't matter where, doesn't have to be a fully refereed journal, but it really makes your application stand out if you've got a modest number of publications to your name, because it shows a level of dedication and commitment, and it shows that you actually have understood the process and that the sort of the methods of archaeology, if you like, in terms of public dissemination of knowledge. So those things I think are key. It is very depressing for people when they're looking for jobs and finding it very hard to get in. There aren't that many jobs. We have been going through a contraction. There was about 7,000 archaeologists a few years ago. We're down to about 4,000 now. So it's always going to be difficult. But I think there will be opportunities, and if we start to see an upswing in development in the next few years, then that will mean the need for more archaeological work done in advance of development. But we need the skills to enable those jobs to be done to a high professional standard. I think standards have raised very significantly over recent years, but we need to maintain that, and there's a danger we're going to lose those skills. The great thing, though, the great thing in terms of people who are not necessarily wanting to get into the profession of archaeology, who just want to do some archaeology, is actually the situation is probably better than it ever has been. Because with the growth of what's become labelled community archaeology, it's actually not that different, I think, to what happened in the 60s and 70s, and perhaps it's more public archaeology in a sense. Is there are now a lot more opportunities for people to get involved in local projects, and even for local groups themselves to come together and get funding through the Heritage Lottery Fund and other sources to undertake projects. Often working in partnership with local archaeological services. I think that is the best way forward. It's really important, I think, that any local community group that's working is in touch with the local historic environment record and the expert advice services that they can draw on if they need to. But it means that nearly everybody knows of an archaeological group or project that's active in their patch, and they're always very welcoming, and they always want to get more people involved, and that's part of the purpose of the project. In some ways, is to get people engaged and enthused. So from that point of view, actually, it's probably easier to get into archaeology now than it's ever been.
Okay. Well, actually, you've just inspired me to ask another question, so there'll be two more questions then. The penultimate question being, you talk about the interaction between the public and archaeologists. And one thing which has really come out of these interviews, but also actually just talking to archaeologists and frankly being an archaeologist, is the relationship between public perception of what we do and whether or not it's actually what's the word? I suppose a professional profession, as it were. People, for example, will often get asked. I've talked to lecturers who will be asked, "So are you all students then?" When they're out digging. Do you think that there's a role for either the CBA or local groups, or actually national bodies, to really step up and present archaeology as actually just as professional as the building service that's on the site as well? Just because you're in a hole doesn't mean that you're just mucking about.
Sure.
Do you think that there's something that needs to be developed there? If we are to raise standards as well, we need to raise the perception of archaeology.
Yeah, there's a clear role for the IFA. I mean, the IFA is the body which is responsible for professional standards. It's seeking chartered status, which I think will help in terms of making it clear to other professional bodies, other professionals, that archaeology is a professional skill. But I think we all have a duty to explain better to people how archaeology works. I think most people don't understand how archaeology works in this country. Most people don't understand about the protection systems and about the development systems that we have. a lot of people think that the public pay for most excavation work in this country, whereas in fact, of course, it's mostly paid for by private developers. And that's one of the issues that we're confronting when we're talking about the potential demise of local authority services, is there's a real misunderstanding about how they're funded. And the fact that actually those services bring in money, often more than they cost by a very large degree, as well as all the secondary spend and the jobs and the other aspects of it into that area. And I think we need to get better at actually articulating that to decision makers, to people in positions of influence. And that's a role that CBA, working with partners like the IFA and ALGAO, the Association of Local Government Archaeological Officers, is keenly pursuing at the moment.
And also I suppose there's a real opportunity there actually to highlight the fact that local archaeology unearths local narratives, local stories about local pasts.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, I did promise you there'd be just one more question, and that question is, it's about the future really, both for the CBA and also I suppose you personally. What are your plans? And also, how does the CBA plan on dealing with, for example, funding challenges? Obviously you've experienced the swinging acts of the government as much as anyone else has. So what's coming up for the CBA and also for you?
Well, we've had some challenging situations to face, because our core grant from the British Academy, which was a substantial source of revenue to us over 50 years, has been cut away. And that was about 25% of our income. By next year that will have gone. So we've had to find ways to replace that. And in some areas we've had to make cutbacks which are highly regrettable, because I think the need is still there. There's no shortage of demand for the sort of things that the CBA does. But we've been flexible, we've been able to find new sources of funding. We've also been able to be quite fleet of foot, I think, in terms of how we work and how we present what we do and how we work with partners. So the big opportunity, I think, for CBA is not that different to how it's always been. It's about public participation. It's about getting the third sector, if you like, the voluntary sector, more engaged. And that's, for example, we've managed to get 4 years funding from the Esme Fairbairn Foundation for a project which is looking at how we can get more advocacy at a local level. Because what we're finding now is when a local authority is making cuts, and they, we understand that that's the position they're in. They're not doing this because they're targeting archaeology. Most of the time they're cutting things right across the board. But the voices that matter in those situations are not actually necessarily national bodies. It's local people, local voters. And one of the key roles that we have through our Esme Fairbairn funded project is to tool up those local groups, those local people, to make the case for why archaeology shouldn't be disproportionately cut. I think we all accept it's going to have to be cut to some degree, as with everything, but it shouldn't be disproportionately cut, and it shouldn't be cut away completely. A, because then those authorities are not fulfilling their obligations under the planning regulations. But actually, even if you removed all that, the key thing is that archaeology works well with developers on the whole. The developers don't want a huge risk to turn up something unexpected in the middle of their development when all the heavy machinery is on site, when they're working to a schedule. They want that to be dealt with in advance, so they know that they can now deal with the site and get on with the building phase of work. And archaeologists work well with developers from that point of view. So I think we need to keep those messages getting out there about that. This isn't red tape. This isn't stopping development. This is actually working hand in hand with development to make sure that things can be dealt with in a timely way. So we know there's huge public interest in archaeology, and it's really just a question of how we put all those things together for the benefit of everybody, and very much for the benefit of knowledge and archaeological understanding. And the CBA will continue to be an active advocate for that right across the UK.
Okay. Wonderful. Okay. Well, it's been a pleasure meeting you, Mike. Thanks again for your time. Bye-bye.
Cheerio.
You can follow Mike Heyworth and the work of the Council for British Archaeology on Twitter.